A mother sells her own house to pay for her daughter's wedding, but after the ceremony, the daughter refuses to let her live in the same house as her and her husband. Margaret had always been a woman of quiet strength. She never sought recognition or praise, but held everything around her together with small acts of care and resilience. Since becoming a widow in her early 40s, she raised her daughter alone, never complaining about the loneliness or lack of support. She faced each day with determination, focused on what needed to be done. She lived with Carol in a simple house inherited from her parents. The walls carried the weight of time in their faded colors, but the place was clean, solid, and alive, because there was love inside. Margaret worked as a school cook for decades, always saving the little she earned. She never had luxuries but made sure Carol grew up with dignity. From a young age, Carol was vain, dreamy, and concerned with what others thought. Margaret noticed this and tried gently to teach her the value of what truly matters. She never pushed. She preferred to love as she knew how. And deep down, she hoped that would be enough. When Carol became the first in the family to attend college, Margaret felt proud. To help her, she sewed uniforms at night, covering expenses that social programs didn't reach. In Carol's final year of college, as she started to grow more distant from home and more involved in the new experiences of adulthood, she met Brian. At first, Margaret only heard about him in passing, small mentions in hurried dinner conversations or quick phone calls on weekends. "He's polite, Mom, and smart," Carol would say, smiling with that spark in her eyes Margaret knew well, the same one she'd seen when her daughter got a new dress as a child. "And does he treat you well?" Margaret would ask, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Of course, he's different from the others. He has plans, knows what he wants, comes from a very structured family." Margaret just nodded without judgment, but with that silent intuition only mothers have. She watched every detail, every word her daughter chose. But, as always, she preferred not to interfere. She trusted, or at least wanted to trust, that Carol knew what she was doing. Over time, Brian's name stopped being just a mention and became a constant part of conversations. "Brian helped me with the final project. Brian's going to introduce me to his parents. Brian thinks we're a great match." The speed with which their relationship progressed began to draw attention. "You've only been together a short time, right?" Margaret asked one afternoon while making coffee. "Yes, but when you know, right, Mum," Carol replied, laughing, fixing her hair in front of the mirror. "Just don't rush too much, daughter." "It's not rushing, it's deciding." The engagement came shortly after, on an ordinary afternoon. Carol came home with a wide smile and a small gold ring on her finger. "He asked me to marry him," she said, holding her mother's hands excitedly. "It was at the park where we had our first date. With flowers, Mum. He brought flowers." Margaret hugged her daughter tightly. "If that's what you want, then we'll make it the best it can be." In the following days, Margaret dove into the plans with a contained but genuine enthusiasm. She jotted down ideas in old notebooks, cut out suggestions from magazines borrowed from the school where she worked. She wanted to give her daughter what she never had: a beautiful, dignified, memorable wedding. Something Carol would remember with joy, not frustration. It was one warm afternoon, sitting in the kitchen, that Carol made the suggestion. "I've been thinking, what if we sold the house?" she said, stirring her tea without looking at her mother. Margaret was silent for a few seconds. "The house?" she repeated calmly. "It's just an idea, Mom, but with the money, we could pay for the party and help buy an apartment. It'd be the perfect start." "Will the apartment be in both your names?" "Actually, in Brian's name. It's more practical," his parents explained. Margaret looked at her daughter attentively. There was sweetness in the request, but also a rehearsed firmness. This was more than an idea. It was a decision wrapped in a soft voice. If that will make you happy, daughter, then let's sell. Carol smiled and jumped to hug her. You're the best mum in the world, you know that. The sale was made quickly. The amount wasn't large, but enough. Margaret watched the furniture being taken away with a tightness in her chest, but didn't show it. She kept telling herself, it's for her happiness. It's for her future. In the months leading up to the wedding, Margaret moved to a longtime friend's house. She got a small room, shared a bathroom with the friend's 2 nephews, and tried to be invisible. Are you sure you're comfortable here? The friend asked one evening. Don't worry, I'm fine. I just want everything to go well for Carol. During the day, she kept working. At night, she hand-stitched the ceremony napkins one by one, with threads matching the chosen flowers. She also made favors from reused fabric and cheap lace. Simple things, but made with care. As the date approached, Margaret folded clothes quietly, preparing a small suitcase with the essentials for the new home. There wasn't a clear plan, just an informal promise. We'll always be together. On the wedding day, the hall was decorated with white flowers and soft music filled the air. Margaret arrived early, helped discreetly behind the scenes, then sat in the front row, alone. She watched her daughter walk down the aisle in the dress she helped choose, eyes brimming with emotion. You look beautiful, she said earlier, holding her daughter's hands. Thank you, Mom. None of this would be possible without you. The ceremony was brief and traditional. They exchanged written vows, promising respect, love, and partnership. The officiant spoke calmly, blessing the union while the guests were moved. At the end, applause came, quiet but sincere, and the music softly resumed. After the ceremony, while guests formed small groups for photos, toasts, and animated comments about the party, Margaret waited. She stood for a few minutes near the cake table, watching her daughter laughing beside Brian, both receiving congratulations from all sides. Margaret took a deep breath, adjusted the strap of her purse on her shoulder, and walked slowly over to where Carol was. She waited for a pause between hugs and then spoke softly, almost as if asking permission. Carol, can I talk to you for a minute? She said, with a subtle smile. Now, Mom, Carol replied, looking around, visibly nervous, fiddling with her earrings as if seeking a distraction. It's a little busy here. It'll be quick. I just wanted to know when I can bring my things to the apartment. Carol looked away, bit her lower lip, adjusted the veil that was already a little out of place, then looked at Brian, who was talking with a cousin a few steps away. She looked back at her mother but avoided direct eye contact. Mom, she started, then stopped. So, Brian and we talked. It's nothing against you, really, but we thought it'd be better to start with a little space. Space? Margaret repeated, trying to keep her expression steady. It's just, for this beginning. We need some time just for us to figure out our routine. I think it's important for both of us just to start. Then we'll talk calmly, see what's best. Margaret said nothing immediately. She just nodded slowly, forced a small smile like someone grateful for a denied favor, and took a step back. Okay, she said, her voice low and controlled. Enjoy the party. She turned slowly, as if trying not to bother anyone, and walked toward the exit. Each step felt heavier than the last. She didn't cry there, didn't show anger. She just gathered what was left of herself and left the hall. That night, she entered the borrowed room with her suitcase still closed. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, staring at the water-stained wall. She took off her shoes calmly and took a deep breath. The silence of the house contrasted with the noise still echoing in her memory. Laughter, applause, toasts. She lay down without covering herself. She stared at the ceiling for a long time, and when she finally let the tears fall, she made no sound. She cried like those who are used to swallowing their pain, quietly, with no witnesses, no explanations. The following days were heavy. Carol didn't call, didn't visit, sent short messages saying everything was great, that newlywed life was busy. "I hope you're well, Mom." "I am, daughter," Margaret replied, even when sharing lunch with cold coffee or sleeping while hearing arguments about soccer and video games from the other side of the door. Weeks later, the silence was broken, but not by Carol. Brian sent a message. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Margaret. I hope you are well. Carol and I have great respect for you, but we feel that the couple's routine demands a dynamic that might not be comfortable for third parties. In the future, we can discuss some viable alternatives. We wish you all the best." Margaret reread the message several times. Polite words, a courteous tone, but each sentence was a closing door. There was no room for her. Over time, the pain turned into exhaustion. She cried alone, ate just enough, slept poorly, but she didn't stop. She kept working. The school children became her light. "Are you making cake today?" one first grader would ask. "I will, but only if you help me set the trays," Margaret replied, smiling. And when she received a tight hug or a note drawn with colored pencils, she forgot for a few minutes what had been done to her. She sewed at night, as always, counted coins for transportation, saved what she could. She knew that to move on, she had to restart, and deep down, although wounded, she still believed it was possible to live with dignity, even without her daughter, without the house, even after everything. Margaret stayed a few more weeks in the borrowed room at her friend's house, trying to fill her days with work and small chores to avoid thinking about the emptiness left behind. She helped in the garden during free time, organized drawers with an almost exaggerated care, and avoided leaving the room beyond what was necessary. The nights were long and cold, even when the temperature didn't justify it. During dinner, she listened to conversations in the living room, the nephews' laughter, the soap operas on TV, and felt like a forgotten piece in a corner of the house. One morning, seeing that her few belongings fit into a single suitcase and a sturdy plastic bag, she decided it was time to find something of her own. She couldn't put it off any longer. She had saved some money with odd sewing jobs and her tight school salary. It wasn't much, but enough for a start. "Are you sure you're leaving now?" her friend asked while making coffee. "Yes, I am. I've already bothered you enough. I appreciate everything you've done for me," Margaret replied, genuinely grateful. "You didn't bother at all, woman. But I understand. Just promise you'll visit me sometimes." "I promise." With the help of someone from the school, Margaret was taken to the house of an elderly couple, renting out a room in the back. The space was small, with a dark wooden single bed, an old wardrobe that creaked every time it opened, and a tiny window barely letting in light. The walls showed signs of water damage near the floor, and the floor was old but well swept. It's simple, but quiet. "The bathroom is outside, shared with us. You can also use the laundry," the woman said, her voice calm and manners careful. "It's perfect. It's what I need," Margaret answered, looking around attentively. She settled there with the calm of someone who no longer expects anything from others. For the first time in a long while, she had a space all her own, even if cramped, old, and quiet. Over the days, she moved her plants to the windowsill, covered the nightstand with a hand-embroidered cloth, and hung a small crocheted towel on the wardrobe door. She bought a used radio at a flea market, and on Sundays sat listening to old songs while sewing. Carol didn't call. Not that week, nor in the weeks after. No messages, no visits. The last in-person contact was that brief conversation on the wedding day. Since then, silence. Margaret didn't insist, didn't ask for anything. She accepted the absence as one accepts stubborn pain, no choice, just learning to live with it. She made it part of her routine, took a deep breath, put on her apron, and kept going. Meanwhile, in the apartment, Carol tried to maintain an image that was already starting to crumble. She still posted smiling photos, still made breakfasts, and got ready for visits. But behind the curtains, the scene was different. The cracks started small, almost unnoticeable. Brian changed. At first, with cutting remarks, short answers, constant impatience. "Can't you cook rice without messing it up?" he said one night, slamming his fork down on the plate. "I just tried to follow how your mom used to do it," Carol murmured, trying to stay calm. "My mom? Don't compare me to those people. This is different. This is the standard." She stayed silent, swallowed hard, and tried to believe it was just stress, that it would pass. But it didn't pass. He began drinking, came home late, smelling of alcohol, red-eyed, voice slurred. "Aren't you going to ask where I was?" he taunted, throwing keys on the table. I was just worried." "Worried? You sound like an old woman. Leave me alone." Soon came the yelling. Doors slammed. Objects thrown to the floor. A glass broken here, a plate there. The tone turned threatening. The once dreamed of home became a minefield. "You wear me out, always complaining." "I didn't complain, I just wanted to talk." "Shut up!" Carol began crying, locked in the bathroom. Sitting on the cold floor, she felt she wasn't the same person anymore. She started hiding marks with makeup, smiled out of obligation. When meeting acquaintances, she said she was fine, never mentioned her mother, never thought of reaching out to her, because doing so would mean admitting a mistake. It would be backing down, and pride wouldn't allow it. She thought about leaving, running away. But the apartment was in his name. Everything there had been financed with the money from selling her mother's house. If she left, she'd lose everything. And worse, she'd have to face the woman she tried to protect and whom she pushed away. Thinking of Margaret tightened her throat. The same pride that once sustained her decisions now kept her trapped inside them. Meanwhile, Margaret's life continued its quiet pace. Not long after, she retired. At school, they organized a small farewell, a simple cake, letters drawn by children, timid words from those who knew how much she had made a difference. "You'll be missed, you know," said an employee, handing her a hastily picked flower. "Now it's time to take care of myself a little," she replied with a brief smile. With her retirement pay and a small settlement, she managed to leave the rented room and find a modest little house at the end of a narrow street. 2 rooms, old flooring, light walls, a small yard, enough to plant. It was simple but cozy. She bought a used wooden table, an old couch, and brought her plants. There, she organized everything with care. Each object had its place. Every corner breathed peace. "It's getting nice," said the woman who rented her the house during a brief visit. "It's becoming mine. That's enough," Margaret replied. In the yard, she grew basil, mint, and rue. In the kitchen, she listened to the radio while cooking basics. She had learned to live with little, but made the little into something good. She gradually made friends with neighbors, received little cakes at the door, exchanged brief words about the weather, listened to the street's bustle, didn't get too involved, didn't expect much, just appreciated the quiet. At the market, people already knew her for her quiet and polite manner. At the bus stop, old school colleagues greeted her. She smiled, thanked them, and moved on. And Carol. Carol became just a name no longer spoken. A silence that stopped hurting every day. Margaret no longer expected anything from her. That chapter had closed with pain, but also clarity. The wound that remained became a mark, and the mark turned into a scar. And Margaret learned to carry the scar with dignity. After all, almost no one reaches the end without them. While Margaret lived her calm routine, surrounded by yard plants, few neighbors she exchanged words with, and the low sound of an old radio, across the city, Carol lived the opposite. A silence full of tension, a house smelling of fear, and a constant feeling of walking on invisible shards. The hell already creeping into her life became more evident by the day. Brian, now almost unrecognizable, had become unpredictable. There were days he barely spoke, others when he exploded for no reason. "You only know how to mess things up," he said, throwing the remote on the couch. I only asked if you wanted dinner now or later, Carol replied, trying to keep her voice neutral. If you knew how to listen, you'd know the answer. Sometimes he didn't yell. He spoke quietly with contained anger, and that hurt more. The words were cold, sharp as blades. You disappointed me. Thought you'd live on what? Sympathy? She no longer recognized her own home. The couch where they had received guests was now the place she curled up silently. The kitchen, which she dreamed of decorating with her mother, was where she hid when he started drinking. It was no longer a home, it was a prison. The final straw came on an ordinary night, one of those nights when everything seems normal until it's not. She had made rice and vegetables and was sitting, waiting for him. When he came in, already smelling of alcohol and looking heavy, he looked at the plate with disdain. Only this. It's all I could make today. If you want, I can heat up some frozen chicken. You serve me this and still want to send me to the kitchen? I'm not ordering you, Brian, I'm just trying to help. He stared at her, 1 second, 2, then raised his hand, and the slap came, sharp, direct, like an answer that needed no words. The sound of his palm against her face wasn't the worst. The worst was what she felt the next instant, the certainty it wouldn't stop, it would happen again, and next time it could be worse. Carol raised her hand to her face, eyes wide open, said nothing, walked slowly to the bedroom, grabbed a small purse, stuffed inside what she could, wallet, phone, a jacket. Her face still burned, but what really burned was her shattered pride. She left the apartment with quick steps. On the street, she started crying and couldn't stop. She didn't know where to go. Had no close friends. Didn't want to return to anyone in his family. Only one person was left. The only one who never turned her back, even when pushed away. She arrived at the door of the old school where she had studied. Waited until dawn to find someone who could help. Explained she needed to find her mother, that she didn't have the address, that it was urgent. After some insistence and recognition, someone agreed to check records and found Margaret's new address. She wrote it down with trembling hands and went there. She knocked on the door in the morning. Swollen face, red eyes, hair hastily tied. When Margaret opened, it took a few seconds to recognize the thin, worn woman with a lost look. "It's me, Mom," Carol said, voice breaking. Margaret didn't answer. She just stepped aside, opening space for her to enter. Carol passed through the door silently, sat in a chair near the table. Margaret prepared tea without saying a word, put the cup before her daughter, and sat across from her. "Sorry," Carol murmured. "I don't even know where to start." "Start here," Margaret said, extending one hand. Carol held on tight, cried and kept crying, broke down, told everything. Words came rushed, between sobs. "I endured so long, I thought I could fix it. I thought it was just a phase." Margaret listened silently, didn't interrupt. Her eyes watery, her hand steady. Carol spoke of humiliation, insults, loneliness. Said she was wrong, that she distanced herself from the one who loved her most, that she traded love for appearances. "I wanted you to be proud of me, and in the end I became someone you wouldn't even recognize. I always knew who you were, Carol. I was just waiting for you to remember too." That night, she slept in her mother's bed. Covered with a thin blanket, she felt safe for the first time in years. There were no arguments, there was silence. And in that silence, forgiveness began to grow, not as an excuse but as recognition. In the following days, she sought legal help, took evidence, photos, recorded conversations, had marks on her body and testimonies from neighbors. The justice system listened, ordered separation, asset freezing, and Brian's restraining order. The process took months, but the outcome came. She received half the apartment's value. With that, she bought a small 2-bedroom house with a garden area. This time, she knew exactly what she wanted to fill it with. "Mom, "I want you to come live with me," she said, holding the key firmly. "Are you sure?" Margaret asked, looking into her daughter's eyes. "This time I am. I don't want a new house. I want to start over with you in it." They moved in together. The house was simple but had wide windows, light walls, and a small space to plant. Carol took care of every detail. She put her mother's plants in the yard, chose light curtains, organized the cabinets with room for both. Their life together wasn't perfect. Sometimes there were long silences, other times small misunderstandings. But it was sincere. Carol made coffee before her mother woke, wrote notes on the mirror reminding about medicine, learned to cook rice with carrots the way Margaret did at school. "Is it good?" she asked, serving the plate. "Almost the same. Just needs a little salt and patience," Margaret replied, smiling lightly. Carol didn't get upset, corrected herself, learned, watched. Every day she tried to show she had changed, not with promises but with gestures. Washed dishes without being asked, sat down to listen to her mother talk about the market, the radio, the plants. Gradually, affection started flowing again between them, slowly, without pressure. Margaret didn't say much, but she looked. And in those looks, Carol felt she was being embraced again, little by little. One day, while organizing an old drawer, Carol found a hand-embroidered napkin. She recognized the fabric. It was one of the ones her mother made for her wedding. She looked at it for a while, holding the cloth carefully. "You kept this?" she asked. "I kept what I could. Not everything is thrown away just because it hurt." Carol sat beside her mother, didn't apologize again. Just leaned her head on her shoulder. "Thank you for letting me come back. You never stopped being my daughter." Over time, the house gained color. They planted flowers in the yard, renovated Margaret's room, bought a bookshelf for the books Carol started reading again. The TV was old but worked, and her mother's radio played softly in the kitchen. Carol no longer tried to erase the past, didn't want to hide the scars. Now she made a point of honoring them, because there, among mistakes, losses, and reunion, was born what really mattered, the truth of a love that endured, even when it seemed like everything was over. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.